Good evening. I'm delighted to be with you. Very grateful to be welcomed by Archbishop Aquila and Bishop Rodrigo and Cardinal Stafford, and to be here with you this evening. And so honored to be able to support the mission of the Fire Foundation, which I find so inspiring. You know, our Catholic faith, of course, commits us to care for the least among us. Jesus says, whatever you did to the least, you did to me. And so as Catholics, it should sort of be taken for granted that we would be inclusive of those who are most in need, and in a certain way it's part of our DNA. I wanted to begin tonight by introducing you to my biggest fan, and so if we could put that first picture up on the screen. Should go up there. There she is. My biggest fan is Elizabeth Lichty. She's the sixth of 7 children in her family. I did her parents' wedding over 25 years ago when I was a young priest, and we've always been close friends with her family. I'm not sure why Elizabeth loves me so much, but she does. And it's true, even before she saw me carrying a large monstrance into Lucas Oil Stadium at the National Eucharistic Congress last year, although she was there, and she screamed at her place in the stadium, like she always does when she sees me, "Bishop!" And she pointed at me. Let's put up the second picture. The second picture is the picture of the day that Elizabeth was confirmed. I got to confirm her. She was confirmed a little younger because she had a life-threatening surgery that she had to undergo. Thankfully, she did very well in that surgery. And that's her family there with the other kids and a couple of other priest friends. And then the third picture, you can put that picture up. This picture was yesterday. She's now 15. She still loves to see me, and she dressed up for that picture when I told her I wanted it. Of course, I love being with Elizabeth. Why? Well, because she makes me feel special. And what makes me feel special about being around Elizabeth is actually the purity of her love. She doesn't love my brilliant homilies. She doesn't think I'm funny or smart. I'm not really able to give her anything that helps her except my joy at seeing her and usually a hug. But you know how it is. You feel that you're loved from a pure heart. She loves me not for what I do, but for who I am. And because I'm special to her. Pure love is that kind of love that loves for the sake of the other. Parents, you know this love. You experienced it the first time you held your children. It's love that we feel from parents or from friends or spouses when we experience what it means to be loved unconditionally. And it's love that we especially come to know when we are weak. Or the word I prefer to use tonight is the word vulnerable. Vulnerability is actually key to love. It's very important to understand that. We have to become vulnerable to receive and to give love. I like that word vulnerable because it comes from the Latin word vulnus, which means wound. So to be vulnerable is to let another person see my wound. Persons with disabilities or persons who have special needs, they don't have a choice in this matter. We see their wounds, and they don't try to hide them or cover them up. And for this reason, they're completely open to love. The rest of us, we struggle with this. We like to cover up our wounds. We like to pretend that they're not there. We're afraid of our wounds, and we like to deny that they exist. We certainly don't like other people to see them. And yet a very special thing happens in a relationship, whether that's a friend or a spouse or a parent, when I know that they see my wound, my failure, my sin, my bad habit, the wounds I carry from my past. I know they see that wound and they still love me. And here I get to experience what pure love is. Just a little taste of it. Actually, an imperfect taste of it, but a real taste of it. When I let myself be loved in the places where I'm wounded. The way I'd like to say it tonight is, it's at that moment I realize I'm special. What does it mean to be special? Why do we call people who might struggle with a handicap people of special needs? Well, to be special is to realize that I have a dignity greater than the particular gifts or strengths or greater than my wounds. I'm worth loving for who I am, not because of anything that I do. And when we experience that kind of love, it changes us. It actually allows us to found our identity on something deeper than my accomplishments or the masks that I put on or what I might do. When I experience that I'm loved for who I am, I can begin to live in true freedom because I don't become ruled by what other people think of me. I'm ruled actually by the truth of who I am and what it means to be loved. In fact, this kind of love requires vulnerability, and it's essential for human flourishing. Until people realize that they're loved for who they are, they won't flourish as human beings. And to the degree that we experience that love, we will flourish. I love this quote from St. John Paul II. It was actually written in his very first encyclical on the Redeemer of Man. I can't help but think of St. John Paul II when I come to Denver, because I came to Denver in 1993 to see St. John Paul II here. Even though I grew up in Denver, I grew up in St. Joe's Parish in Golden and went to church at Our Lady of Fatima in Lakewood for some time. But St. John Paul II said this: "Man cannot live without love. He remains a being that is incomprehensible for himself. His life is senseless if love is not revealed to him, if he does not encounter love, if he does not experience it and make it his own, if he does not participate intimately in it." Brothers and sisters, I think this is one of the reasons we have so many struggles in our world today. So many people don't know they're loved. They don't know who they are. Now, of course, the reality is that in Jesus Christ, God made himself vulnerable to us. This is the power of what Jesus did. Look at the crucifix. What do you see there? A wounded man, a vulnerable man, a man who became weak, powerless. Why did he do that? So he could reveal the essence of love. He made himself vulnerable so he could give himself to you and me. And nowhere is this more clear than in the Eucharist. In fact, the fathers of the church used to speak about the self-emptying of Jesus, how, of course, as St. Paul says, right, he did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself and he became one of us. But they said the self-emptying didn't even end at the incarnation. It continues to the point of becoming our food. He empties himself so much that he says, "My flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink." And he comes to us really vulnerable, inviting us to be vulnerable to him. Why? Because he wants you to know you're special to him. He wants you to know how much you matter to him. As has been stated, I had the privilege of leading the 3-year National Eucharistic Revival for the U.S. bishops, and I was the chair of the National Eucharistic Congress, and these are really some of the great privileges of my life. And these events, I'll count them as some of the great events for my whole life. Of course, I didn't do any of it alone, and there are people in the room here who contributed greatly to these movements. But personally, I experienced both of them as moments of grace, where God in his mercy and goodness decided for some reason to use this movement to pour out his love more profoundly on his people. I had to admit to myself, even at the Congress, that I was surprised how God worked. Actually, I found myself on the last night of the Congress there in Lucas Oil Stadium. How many of you were there? in the room here. We're there at the Congress. Great, thank you. I found myself there Saturday night, Lucas Oil Stadium, tens of thousands of people in silence adoring the Blessed Sacrament. And I found myself repenting for not believing enough in God's goodness, that he would be so generous in pouring out his love. And it makes you realize how much God desires to bless his people and to bless his church. So I guess the question I just invite you to reflect on this evening is, have you encountered this vulnerability of Jesus in the Eucharist? And have you let him touch your own wounds? This is what he wants to do. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we have people who have special needs around us. When you see those pictures of Elizabeth, when you think about the love we receive there, we come to taste a little bit of what unconditional love is like. And it helps us to remember our own vulnerability and that we can't really put on masks or stand before God with anything except our own need. I want to just close by telling you one story. A story about a man who taught me about the vulnerability of love. So when I was a student priest, I was living in Rome, working on a doctorate degree, and I got to know Mother Teresa's sisters, the Missionaries of Charity. And on a few occasions, they invited me up to Ghent, Belgium, for a retreat. And when I went to Ghent, I was introduced to a man who the sisters knew there, who was a paraplegic. His name was Fernand, and he was completely paralyzed. He could only move his head, so he could speak, but he couldn't move any other part of his body, except actually he could squeeze his hand just a little bit, his thumb, enough to press a button to buzz the door to his one-room apartment and let people in and out of his one-room apartment. And Fernand was actually the reason that the Missionaries of Charity were in Ghent, Belgium. It happened that Mother Teresa had come to Ghent to give a talk, and the bishop asked if she would send sisters to Ghent, and she said, well, I don't see that many poor people here. And he said, well, come meet Fernand. And so he brought Mother Teresa to that one-room apartment to meet Fernand. And they spent some time together, and she began to realize who Fernand was. You see, Fernand wanted to be a priest, but shortly before he was to enter seminary, he came down with this strange disease that paralyzed him. Actually, when I met him, he had been in that bed for 40 years. And when Mother Teresa met him, she was very moved by his love for the Lord. Of course, you can imagine the conversion that he had to go through during those early years, accepting that his vocation was to be in that bed. And in fact, what he said to me when we talked about it, he said, I know I've saved more souls from this bed than I would have as a priest, because this bed is my altar where I make my sacrifice. So when Mother Teresa was visiting with him, there was a moment where one of the co-workers of Mother Teresa said, Fernand, you don't have a crucifix on your wall. Why don't you have a crucifix? And Mother Teresa apparently got upset, and she said, don't you get it? He's the crucifix. And actually, Fernand would keep a crucifix right on his chest, like this one bishops keep on their chest, right? And he would hold it between his arms as a reminder of what he was doing in that bed. And anyway, the last time that I was there, I probably got to see Fernand about 5 or 6 times, and we would always celebrate Mass there in his room and give him communion and pray with him. And the last time I was there, we came to his room with the sisters from the convent, and we had Mass there on the table, and they took the crucifix off Fernand's chest and put it on the altar for Mass. And I thought, what a great symbol, actually, of what the Mass is, right? All that suffering of Fernand poured into that cross and then placed on the altar and then offered to God through Jesus. But we celebrated a beautiful Mass, and after Mass, we were in those moments of silence after communion, and I had given the blessing. And then Fernand said this line to me. He said, you know, Father Andrew, I'm just a man with all my weakness, but I'm burning with love. And I must admit that phrase, it haunted me. It actually, all the way home on the airplane, 9-hour flight from Belgium back to the United States, it was all I could think about. And I thought about the burning bush that Moses saw, that fire of God's love, or I thought about the Sacred Heart of Jesus, that fire that burns in the heart of Jesus. And I felt like that's what it was like to be in Fernand's presence. And I realized I wanted to be like him. I too wanted to be so vulnerable to God and so weak before him that I could know that fire of God's love burning in my heart, so that I could say like him, I'm just a man with all my weakness, but I'm burning with love. Brothers and sisters, God became vulnerable with us to reveal our vulnerability and our need. And these people this evening who are even with us, who have special needs, they reveal this vulnerability of God to us. And they invite us to allow our own hearts to be transformed in that love. So it's my prayer for you too, that you might be able to one day say, I'm just a woman with all my weakness. I'm just a man with all my weakness, but I'm burning with love. Thank you, and God bless you.